Hello, chemists. Michele Glass here, and we are back working on our macromolecules. Last video, we talked about carbohydrates, and now we're ready to move on to lipids. Remember, as we study our macromolecules, pay attention to three things. You need to pay attention to the structure, you need to be able to give examples, and you need to know the job that that molecule has in the cell. And so let us get started with our lipids. Now to kind of begin, let's look at the structure and we'll see that your lipids have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like we saw with carbohydrates. But here we have a ratio of like 1 carbon to 2 hydrogen. And then you just have like a couple of oxygen at the end of the molecule. So we really think about our lipids as these long, what we can call hydrocarbon chains. And there is oxygen there, but again, it's going to be on like the end of the molecule. These long hydrocarbon chains, think about, again, carbon bound with carbon. Remember, carbon can actually pair with 4 things. So we're going to see hydrogens filling in those additional bonds. And I can just kind of draw my lines there to indicate, okay, that's where the hydrogen is. That's kind of a simplified version. And then what we'll see is very often a carboxyl group, functional group at the end. So there's where we're seeing a little bit of our oxygen. Because we have these super long hydrocarbon chains, our lipid molecule can be described as hydrophobic. We've introduced this term before. Remember, it's like water fearing because your lipid molecules are nonpolar. This is super significant, y'all, because remember, 70% of the body weight of an adult human is water. So all of the chemistry that's happening in our body is happening either in the fluid inside of our cells, which is water-based, or the fluid on the outside surrounding our cells, which is also water-based. And so here we have these lipids that are in this like super watery environment, and the lipids are all nonpolar or hydrophobic. And so this really makes a significant difference in the chemistry. And we'll be talking about how this is handled in the body, really throughout the course. It'll come up again and again. So this is kind of our basic structural information that we need. Let's talk next about fatty acids as an example. What I've drawn for you here with that hydrocarbon chain ending with the carboxyl group is really basically fatty acid structure. And so a fatty acid is called an acid because of that carboxyl group, which is carboxylic acid, right? So we're seeing that here. Now the fatty acid is going to be a fuel for ATP, just like we saw with carbohydrates. But here, this is going to be when your cells are resting, when your whole body is asleep, or when you're doing like a slow kind of long term physical activity. So even just like the posture of holding your body upright is going to be a slow, long-term physical activity, right? Or we could think about taking a walk, or we could think about doing that marathon run, or, holding, carrying a heavy load for a long way, something like that. So this is going to be when your cells are using fatty acids as their ATP source. We also have a molecule called a triglyceride. Now the triglyceride molecule we'll see is, give myself a little bit of space here. Triglyceride molecule is going to be a glycerol. And then it's going to have 3 fatty acids. I'm going to abbreviate FA for fatty acid. If you have a diglyceride, that would just be 2 fatty acids paired to the glycerol. If you have a monoglyceride, that would just be 1. So you can collectively call all of these molecules glycerides if you want. I'm going to go ahead and put it back into the triglyceride with the 3 fatty acids. Now, this is actually what we see stored in our adipose tissue. So adipose tissue is a tissue that we're covering as part of our lab. And this is going to store triglycerides. So one thing to pay attention to is that triglyceride molecule is constructed of fatty acids. So this is actually how we store our fatty acids to use for later when we're sleeping. So when you're eating food, you're eating both carbohydrates and lipids. Those carbohydrates go into the bloodstream, that glucose gets used to make ATP. Your body is active, right? Most of your cells are going to be needing that, and that's great because you're taking it into the body. It's super available. And so any fatty acids that you're eating then get to be stored for like when you're asleep and you are not eating food, or give you that storage that you need for that long-term kind of hustle, that long-term activity that you're doing, right? So a triglyceride molecule is storing energy for later. So that's one of its important functions. Also, what we'll say is like a cushion or shock absorption. So when we talk about the adipose tissue, we see it strategically located around the body to protect key organs. So we have a layer of adipose tissue on the outside of our spinal cord. So that's helping to protect our spinal cord. You have quite a bit of adipose tissue in your eye orbit around your eyeball, right? So kind of filling in that gap space and like a protective cushion around this important soft organ. You have adipose tissue surrounding on your kidneys. You have adipose tissue around your heart. You have a layer of adipose tissue over top of your organs in your abdominopelvic cavity, right? And so this is going to be a very important function of that triglyceride molecule. We'll also see insulation. So you have a layer of that adipose tissue underneath the skin, right? That's helping to protect, thermoregulate, and keep you warm. We'll also see that triglycerides are important in helping to absorb and transport fat-soluble vitamins. Because if it's a vitamin that's fat-soluble, that means it's non-polar. That means it doesn't dissolve in water. You either dissolve in water or you dissolve in fats. You either dissolve in polar or you dissolve in non-polar. So without the triglyceride, you wouldn't be able to get those nutrients to the body, right? So that's going to be a super important part. Examples of these vitamins would be vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. And we'll see throughout the course that these all have some really important functions, ramifications for our body, for the health of our body. So we need to have this fat here to be able to get those vitamins. And then remember, we talked about glycolipids up here in our carbohydrates. And we said it's a carbohydrate and a lipid combined, and it's part of that cell membrane structure. So that's going to be true here with our triglyceride as well. So we'll see a little functionality here with our cell membrane. Next, let's take a look at our phospholipid. And I'm going to draw a picture of it right here. So that's my phospholipid. I don't like how I drew it, so I'm going to go like this a little bit. We're going to describe it as having a hydrophilic head, and then what we would call hydrophobic tails. That word down there says tails. So remember, hydrophilic means water loving, whereas hydrophobic means water fearing. And so what we'll see is we have in the phospholipid, half of the molecule is water loving and half of the molecule is nonpolar. It's constructed of those fatty acids, right? And so this molecule is going to be super important in the structure of the cell membrane. In fact, we'll see like the basic outline, the basic structure of a cell membrane is built around these phospholipid molecules. Okay, so we can even call the cell membrane a phospholipid bilayer because that is the significance of this molecule. There's two more examples to give. So let's next look at the steroid. When we talk about the steroid structure, we'll see that it has 4 hydrocarbon rings. 4 hydrocarbon rings. And the steroid is going to be important as an example of cholesterol, which is going to stabilize the cell membrane. And we'll also see it acting as hormones. So we have a bunch of hormones, including sex hormones, such as estrogens and testosterones that are being produced by steroids. So we've mentioned hormones before. In our endocrine system, hormones are those chemical messengers that are produced by one part of the body and travel through the bloodstream, which is water-based. So here again, we have this issue of a lipid moving through the blood, but the nice thing about a steroid hormone is it can go straight through that phospholipid cell membrane and enter the cell and cause changes to occur there. So steroids are going to be important in stabilizing the cell membrane. They're going to be important as hormones, which are these significant communicating molecules. They also are important components in what are called bile acids, which are critical to our ability to break down and then ultimately absorb fat from our diet. So we'll see that the steroid will be involved in this digestion and absorption of fats from our diet. The last one to mention here is prostaglandin. So the prostaglandin is a lipid. I'm going to just give myself a little bit more room by erasing this arrow. When we talk about prostaglandins, we're going to see 2 important things. One is that this is involved in our pain signaling. So when we are detecting pain, it's actually that our tissues are damaged and releasing prostaglandin, which is then signaling to our neurons. Our cells are responding to that release of prostaglandin as pain. So that's going to be very important piece of information. And we'll see then prostaglandins are important as these like local hormones, like localized signaling. Local meaning it doesn't have to go through the bloodstream. It can just take action like right there in the neighborhood, right there close to those cells that released it. We will also see that prostaglandin is important in helping to regulate blood pressure, which I'm going to abbreviate here as BP, regulate blood pressure and inflammation. There's this interesting discussion of omega-3 fatty acids in your text. Remember, your text is linked in the video description, talking about fish oils and so forth, and the relationship of those omega-3 fatty acids to prostaglandin, and then from there to the regulation of our blood pressure and inflammation in terms of reducing heart disease. So make sure you're reading about that because it's really interesting. Okay. This got a little bit messy, but hopefully you were able to follow along as you were taking your notes. Stay tuned for our next video, continuing our discussion of macromolecules. We're going to be looking at proteins next. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.